Hi, I come to you sweaty and I just had a swim and now my fringe is ridiculous. I'm gonna start a reading vlog for Middlemarch by George Eliot. And this was, I was trying to think about when it was published the other day and I couldn't remember if it was 1871 to 2, that's when it was first published. So yeah, I'm gonna read this and I'll put like a picture of the reading schedule that I've made myself based on a couple other people's reading schedules. Yeah, I'm excited to read it. I kind of want to just like read it in one go. I think that would be good. Hopefully I will, you know, keep you updated with my progress. I do have a deadline at the end of this current month, so that's why in the schedule there's like 2 days which have nothing on the 31st of May and the day before that. And I kind of feel like I probably, you know, I don't think I'll keep on track with this. It's probably much more likely that I will read less now whilst I still have this application due in, and then read more once it's gone in. And I will be reading other things at the same time, including stuff for this application. One of the things I'm currently listening to is Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell, which I am not enjoying. Today I think I need to read 3 chapters to read, you know, get my reading out of Middlemarch, so I'm excited to begin, and I will, you know, yeah, check in later. Hi, you might be able to hear some music in the background. That is my mum rehearsing with her band. But something that I wanted to say is I read this book yesterday, Dead Collections by Isaac Fellman, and it was enjoyable. Something that made me like, I don't know, happy, I guess, is that Middlemarch is mentioned in it. The character, who's like a vampire and an archivist, Sol, he says, "Then I sat down and tried to read Middlemarch, but my concentration's not great right after the transfusion. I feel blurry, bloated, a little drunk. It takes the rest of the night to even out, and then I'm okay for a couple of days." Anyway, I put Middlemarch down because the phone rang and I forgot that it wasn't daytime. So yeah, me, just like vampire archivists, are trying to read Middlemarch. So, I'm on the second day of reading Middlemarch and I've just finished my day 1 reading, so I think that's, you know, a good glimpse as to how this is gonna go. Yeah, but I kind of wanted to just talk about like the first 3 chapters, I guess, slash my first impressions, because this isn't the first George Eliot book that I've read. I've read Silas Marner, but I read that years ago in my first year of university, I think, and I didn't particularly like the story, so I wasn't like, you know, I don't really remember other than that what I thought about it. But yeah, I'm just like really enjoying the writing style. I think it's really beautiful. Well, I really enjoy like the tone. I feel like it's kind of wry in a way, and I loved how Dorothea was described as being, you know, a girl so handsome and with such prospects which nothing could hinder but her love of extremes, which, like, I mean, as a mood. I really enjoyed that description. And there's lots of descriptions as well that I'm just like, wow, this is great. Yeah, and just like, it seems very interesting. There's lots of references. Every chapter starts with a quote, or so far every chapter started with a quote from something else. And it's also funny because the quote for chapter 3 is from Paradise Lost, and as soon as I read the first line I was like, oh, that's obviously from Paradise Lost. And it's also yet another sign that I need to reread slash read it, because I have been thinking about it recently, like in the past like month or 2, just that I'd like to finish reading it and reread what I read. The other thing that is good to this vlog is that I did finish Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell. I'm glad to be done with that, and it does mean that I can read more of this and work on a PhD application. But anyway, I think I'm going to really enjoy this, so I'm excited to, you know, keep reading. And I think I'll probably try to find an audiobook. I think there's a Juliet Stevenson one and I really like her, so I can like listen to it and read as well. If there's one like on the library, that would be great. And also, yeah, I did split up the book, but I did daily chapters up until where I'm supposed to get to by the end of this month, so up to book 4, called 3 Love Problems. That's why the very much large out because these are just for the books then, because obviously I might have to rejig how many I'm reading. So yeah, cool. I will talk to you later and hopefully I will keep enjoying it. And yeah, that is something that shocked me, that I really like the writing actually, because I did think that hearing other people talk about the writing style, I thought it was going to be like, what's the word where it's like really like dense but like obtuse, is that the right word? I'm not sure, but instead I'm just finding it like imaginative and quite fluid and interesting. So yeah, alright. I'm on day 3. I've got my fringe in a little pineapple and I'm up to date with the reading, or at least like I'm reading day 3's reading on day 3, and I guess it was past midnight, but I managed to finish day 2's reading on day 2, so I caught up yesterday, so that's great. I'm currently on chapter 8, but something I wanted to talk about is that, yeah, like something that has really struck me. I know I spoke last time about like how I was finding the writing style really beautiful, and that's still the case, but something also that is very striking is how like scientific a lot of the descriptions are. Like there's references to, I think there was somebody whose like eyes were like phosphate, and they're just, yes, there seems like a kind of scientific vocabulary being used to describe just like people and everyday interactions, which is interesting. And I think it is actually something that I was aware that George Eliot was like very interested in. I think it's actually from like a Ron Lit video, which I don't think is on the internet anymore, where she talks about middlemarch and then like Darwin and like the theory of evolution and stuff. I think that's right, so maybe that's where I got the idea. Something that I also wanted to talk about was how Miss Brooke, like the surname Brooke, Dorothea Brooke, they're sort of participating in this pun, specifically Dorothea at the moment, because a brook without the E is like a little sort of stream. And so like when Casaubon says things like this, hence he determined to abandon himself to the stream of feeling, and perhaps was surprised to find what an exceedingly shallow rill it was. So Mr. Casaubon found that sprinkling was the utmost approach to a plunge which his stream would afford him. And that's obviously sort of about feeling, whatever, a metaphor for that, but it's also then like about Miss Brooke herself, right? Like in the sense of what she can give him, or like how she actually is, or all of that. So anyway, I just thought that was really interesting and fun. There was a moment before then that I was like, because that's when I remembered what a brook was. I can't, oh yes, there we go. They talk about like a little crack in the Brooke family. It's actually when Mr. Brooke is talking, and he's talking about the desire to like be a scholar in their family. Gosh, I got very hot. When I record I can't have the fan on, so it gets hotter. Yeah, so Mr. Brooke is talking about knowledge in his family, and so he said like, well, it lies a little in our family. I had it myself, that love of knowledge and going into everything, though that sort of thing doesn't often run in the female line, or it runs underground like the rivers in Greece. You know, it comes out in the sons, clever mothers. So yeah, and I just thought that was interesting and fun to think about. I always really love like elaborate puns, just like with Plain Bad Heroines, where you could sort of argue like, you know, WASP, like white Anglo-Saxon Protestant American culture, or whatever, like waspy people, like that means that Plain Bad Heroines is kind of all an elaborate pun where these like sapphic women are being hunted by wasps. Anyway, that's really not that relevant, sorry. I'm gonna keep reading. I think that reading today is actually quite a small amount, so I might read a bit more because it looks like tomorrow I have a bit more reading, and also like good to get ahead because I probably will stop reading at some point in the run up to the end of this month. Yeah, yesterday I had a crisis about trying to read more books for my application, but I won't be doing that. Yeah, also I've showed you some of the process of making elderflower cordial, which I'm making with my mum, or at least like the beginning period, because now we've got a bit left to do today because you leave it overnight. But anyway, I'm excited and probably eat some cereal, and yeah, see you later. Guess who's read book 1 of Middlemarch. Me. I was just looking up my schedule. Yeah, because I am 1 day behind. It's the 23rd of May and I should have already started book 2 today. And I probably will read some of it. Basically the reason why I'm behind is because I need some people to read my PhD application as it stands so that I can get some feedback and then change it. So that's what I was doing yesterday, and then today I sent it off. So then, yeah, and I mean, I did read some of this. I actually listened to an audiobook I found read by Juliet Stevenson. Yeah, so I did listen to a bunch of that reading yesterday, but then yeah, I just finished listening to the final chapter of book 1. I'm really enjoying it, and that's really great. I think the sketches of people's character is really interesting. I think like I said before, like the writing style I really enjoy. I think it's beautiful. I think maybe I wanted to comment about one where I was like laughing about somebody with you, almost in a Jane Austen way, but not quite. In the last few chapters there's been some like comments about like people reading and like how that's bad, or like, oh, he's only reading a novel, which I always think is funny in books, especially books like Middlemarch, which are kind of seen as part of like the development of the novel and like the literary history of the novel. Yeah, well, I've like put an exclamation point next to this guy who was saying like there should be a little devil in a woman, Mr. Chichley, whose study of the fair sex seemed to have been detrimental to his theology. It's just like comments like that I just think are so funny. Like, oh yeah, like when they're discussing the newly elected mayor of Middlemarch, and he said to predominate so much in the town that some called him a Methodist, others a hypocrite, according to the resources of their vocabulary. So yeah, ready to go on to book 2, Old and Young. Think it's a shame Dorothy got married to Mr. Casaubon. He kind of seemed to suck. And also, I was trying to figure out how much older than he, because there was like a comment that he was like 27 years older than her, but then if he was 58, which is what I thought he was, that would make her 31, wouldn't it? Is that how maths works? 27, 58 is 51, 41, 31. Yeah, make her 31, which seems to be much older than... Like, I don't think she's 31, I think she's in her early 20s, isn't she? So maybe I just misremembered and it was 3 and 7 that they said was between them. Anyway, but pretty appalling. I really dislike that. But yes, other than that, I'm very happy with it. I think what I'm gonna do is like check-ins every book, like every time I finish a book, and yeah, there are 8, and I just finished the second one, which is called Old and Young, and it was exquisite. Gosh, I don't know what I want to say because I think it's just fantastic, and I'm really enjoying it. And so I'm thinking a lot recently, especially because of this PhD application that I'm writing, about the development of reproductive medical practices alongside kind of discussion of like actual lived experience of those reproductory practices, as well as kind of like a Marxist feminist framework for the spread of knowledge about reproduction, about stopping reproduction in the past, in the Victorian era and into the 20th century. And so yeah, I've really been thinking about that and thinking about kind of like what medicine does and what the development of healthcare does. And my PhD stuff is looking at it through like textual explorations of that, but I probably won't go on to the 3rd book yet today because I want to reread what I read, because the last like 5 chapters I'm gonna probably reread, or maybe not like completely all of them, but I just want to like make sure I've got like everything, and I'm gonna like tab it out properly, just because like the way that it's talking about the development of healthcare is so fascinating to me. And in maybe chapter 17 or something, like it was directly tied to imperial expansion or like colonialism, which I thought was, I mean, true. I think that's absolutely part of like this technological advancement that is called healthcare, but also, yeah, just like fascinating that somebody would like explicitly draw that parallel in this. And I believe that this is set in the 1820s, late 1820s. There's a couple of like references to George IV, I think, and so yeah, he was like 1820 to 1830, and then they also mentioned like a prime minister who was around near the end of the 1820s, and then 1 month of 1834, but I don't think it's set then. Anyway, but like that was all just fascinating me immensely. And then alongside that is this sort of like, I talked a little bit about the scientific like register of the novel, and that is very much present in it because it's a massive theme. Science is obviously part of medical advancement, technological advancement, and that's, you know, a big thing in this too. And I guess the reason why its presence is so integral to the story and to what George Eliot I think is trying to do, like trying to kind of explore, is that these things are very much about the nature of reality, of fact, of truth, of rationality, of sensory experience to some degree, or just like experience, and kind of like, I guess, sort of the qualitative or like the scientific method of sort of getting data and then making like theses from that, but thinking about that through like a sort of more individual or like more human level, and specifically like a woman's perspective on that, especially through the figure of Dorothea, but not just that, you know. And yeah, like that's sort of why it's so ecstatically good, I think. Just the way that it's describing Dorothea's like responses, at one point she's described as like a victim of feeling, which is just, I don't know how to express that, how much I'm really enjoying this and like love it. There's some stuff about art, like looking at art and the experience of looking at art and kind of understanding versus seeing, and not to bring up Villette all the time, but I do kind of feel like there's a similar kind of dialogue about perspective versus sight versus knowledge and truth. So seeing versus truth, whether they're the same thing or whether they're not. And yeah, all of that is just so fascinating to me. And yeah, just like, it's just great. So yeah. Oh, and something that's really fun about this is that like when I was like 17, I think for one of my like A-level exams, you know, you had to write like on an extract that was provided to you that you hadn't sort of read before, like unless you had read the book or the poem already. Yeah, I think it was just like A-level practice stuff, and we were given a passage from Middlemarch that was about who now I know is Dorothea, but like just like a woman looking at a piece of art and this man being like, wow, she's so beautiful, this artist, German artist, and then bringing this other man to go see her and stuff. And I remember vividly because she was like described as a Quaker, which I was really interested in when I was 17, and I just, yeah, I remember being really struck by it, I guess, and finding it really beautiful and also really interesting because it is about the way that women are represented, the way that women exist in the world, the sort of aesthetification of women and womanhood, and these different models, because she's in a room with, is it Venus? I think she's, you know, anyway. So yeah, that was just also really interesting, and I was like, I think it is in this book, because I couldn't quite remember if it was, but then as we got closer to it, I was like, wait a second, this is sort of feeling like it's about to ring a bell. And yeah, it was that. I will stop talking in a second, but I just wanted to say that I guess it's just because like she's in Italy, Dorothea is, for her honeymoon, for the majority of this book. I mean for all of it, but like not all of it is focused on her. We also are focused on a doctor in Middlemarch who was very annoying, but whatever. And like also some other people too. Anyway, so then because of that, because she's been in Italy, I've been thinking kind of more about like why Victorians and Edwardians were so obsessed with Italy, and like I don't know, like there is something about Italy that clearly captures like British imagination, and I suppose it's because it's like a space of immense feeling maybe, and that's sort of cathartic and kind of liberatory to like British sort of ideas about how much feeling you should have, or maybe how much pleasure you should have. Yeah, like sensory experience perhaps. So because I've been thinking then about like Lucy Honeychurch in A Room with a View by Ian Forster being in Florence in A Room with a View, and what that does to her and how it's a catalyst for her, I don't know, her development, her not coming of age but her coming to life basically, I guess. And to some degree I think it could be contrasted with Dorothea and her experience, although maybe she sort of experiences almost an inverse of that, but by experiencing feeling more. So I guess it's just about like where those feelings are being placed or directed. So yes, anyway, I don't know if I made any sense there. But I just thought that was interesting. It's the 27th of May, so I'm definitely way out of my schedule because I was supposed to like finish this 2 days ago. Cool. I will talk to you with an update, hopefully sooner than before, but I mean, yeah, it's coming up to the end of this month, so I'm in the kind of final crunch with my application, but then once it's done, I shall be free. Hi. So, I just read book 2. That was book 2, yeah. No, sorry, that was book 3. Book 3. I meant to say, actually, I have a tense machine on. That's why this looks weird. But yes, I am a day early, partially because I left those 2 blank spaces for yesterday and today, just not really knowing how stressed out I'd be and like getting my application in, but I did submit my application, so I had today to sort of do some reading. So yeah, I finished that book. Things are developing. Romances, intrigues, unrequited love, engagements, it's all going on. Foolish behaviour about horses and money, it's all going on. I'm a big fan of Mary Garth. I think she's cool and sweet. It's called Waiting for Death, so you sort of know at least some things that are going to happen. And I guess it also does feel a bit like, rather than the first and second books where it's more set up, this was also kind of more like waiting almost. Like the first 2 books are kind of introductory in terms of character, setting, place, vibe. Whereas this book was more kind of like, we're about to start more plot, but then we're waiting. We're waiting for a few people to do something. Not all people are like waiting for death. I wonder also if you could like contrast kind of like waiting for marriage as a kind of death. I don't know if she, like Elliot, would like necessarily think that, but obviously lots of people do collate those 2 things in fiction, especially, I guess especially like later Victorian fiction. Been doing some knitting for my mum. Also hoping to make some jam, I think raspberry jam, and yeah, get reading the 4th book, and then my next update I'll be halfway through. So I know I showed me making some of this cordial the other day, but like this is me drinking it, so delicious. I think that's everything for this update. Hopefully next time I talk to you I will be in less pain, and yes, I'm kind of hoping to get through this book actually quicker. I might make a revised schedule where I read more per day, just because I'd like to finish it. Like, I'm really enjoying it, so I just kind of like to finish it. But I mean, I don't know if that will actually affect how fast I read this, because I'm very good at making plans and not fulfilling them. But anyway, I will share another update as and when. Bye! I've read book 4. Book 4. And now I'm reading The Dead Hand, which, yeah, I think I know whose dead hand it's going to be, but I could be wrong. Because book 4 ends with, she put her hand into her husband's and they went along the broad corridor together. I read book 4 quicker, even quicker than the schedule that I recently redid. But yeah, I thought I would say that like I'm not colour coordinating these because I don't really care to, but basically these tabs are for mentions of either things related to like motherhood, pregnancy, maternity, that kind of thing, or they are things related to intrusions into the narrative. So where like George Eliot will write something like, oh, but why do we always focus on Dorothea? Like, let's go and see what Casaubon is doing and stuff like that, because I find that stuff really interesting and fun too. I was also thinking how this book just kind of feels like it's about like that sort of like there might be laws, there might be economics, there might be just like social order generally, but feeling is, you know, really people are responding to the law of feeling, or like that's the highest law. It's not a very good way to put it. And it also was something like, and of course Mr. Casaubon, he has a disease of the heart, like he literally has a disease of the heart. But of course he also has a metaphorical disease of the heart because he's an awful man who is just like way too old for his wife, doesn't show any kind of like real feeling towards her except from that very moment that I just read, which is slightly more tender than anything else. Yeah, and like especially in contrast with Dorothea. I think we're told often that she's like kind of robust and healthy, but she's also like, she is extremely like affected by the world around her. You know, just want to keep reading, want to know what's going to happen to people. You know, I really like Fred. I said before that I really like Mary, and I still really like Mary. I think she's great. Yeah, it's just great update for me. Is good. I probably look really tired too because I'm extremely tired. I actually did already start book 5. Also, like the blackcurrant jam that my mum and I made yesterday, looks like blood, so I hope you enjoy that. But it was great. Progress update. Hello. So, completed book 5. Yeah, still loving it. On to The Widow and the Wife next. One of the kind of like lessons of Casaubon, I feel like, which is underlined in The Dead Hand, is that the pursuit of knowledge is meaningless without like subjectivity, without personal feeling. And Dorothea finds that like extremely difficult when her husband is alive, how he's just like so detached from the knowledge that he's supposedly passionate about. It becomes like a tomb, like literally suffocating, and has this hold on his heart. But I really love that, and I think I just really love this book so far. I feel like I had maybe some more intelligent thoughts to say, but now I cannot remember any. This section, The Dead Hand, was very interesting in terms of both politics and in terms of the medical profession. There's a whole chapter where they talk about healthcare and capitalism, basically, and kind of like the distinction of rational, scientific medical men from quacks, which of course is like a very interesting kind of balance which continues to this day between regulated, institutionalized medical care and like more individual, spiritual, just simply different forms of healthcare. Of course, to lesser and greater degrees there, you know, whichever one is a quack. I lost what I was saying there, but that's fine. There's some interesting stuff about maternity again, and specifically I guess about children. It's all developing. Also, I learned that Dorothea was 21 in that book, so like she must have been 18 or something when she married Mr. Casaubon, which is gross. So I must have just completely misremembered. The only good thing about Casaubon, okay, the only two good things about Casaubon is that one, he's dead, and two, I mean, we obviously knew his death was coming. Like, obviously Peter Featherstone died in Waiting for Death, or like was dying in the second book, but like there were many people, including Casaubon, who could have died in that book, including like Fred. His death has always kind of been on the cards, even at the very beginning of his marriage to Dorothea, especially because they were all like, God, he's such an old man, like what the fuck are you doing? Yeah, but then the second good things about him is that he's extremely petty. Like, he's written this codicil in his will that like Dorothea won't get money, or like it's something like that, if she marries Will Ladislaw, which is obviously just shitty behaviour and a way to control what your wife is doing even when you're fucking dead. And obviously that's what The Dead Hand is somewhat like. It's not just the intellectual pursuits that he was undertaking that he wants or wanted Dorothea to continue, but it's also his literal control over her heart too, or attempts to control it. Not really sure what I was saying, but there we go. I am now on page 535, and yeah, I read this book one day quicker than I had planned on my schedule, so I've yet again like shaved off a day. And obviously I didn't really think about the fact, but probably it's because I don't have to do my application, so I have more like mental spoons, which is great because I'm really enjoying it. So, you know, I want to keep, hopefully I will update you pretty quickly on the next book, and we'll keep enjoying it, and so on. Hi. I feel like my fringe looks really weird today. Sorry. I'm back, which means I have completed another book. I've completed book 6 and now I'm going to be moving on to book 7. Two Temptations is what it's called. So yeah, I'm on page 639, so really in the home straits of this book, which is exciting. Something I wanted to say about like the titles of each book, and I have kind of touched upon it, I guess, because I did talk about Waiting for Death last time, but it's just how like what is being signified by the title could be multiple things, especially I guess like throughout the book, and then maybe at the end we get more of like a concrete understanding of like who it is actually about. But there are all of these like parallelings and doublings that are happening on in the book in a way that's like fun to read. There are just like a large number of characters, which is maybe a little bit difficult sometimes to kind of keep up with, and occasionally I'm like, wait, who is this guy? But then generally it comes back to me, or you know, you're like, oh, we haven't actually focused on him much yet, so that's why I don't remember him very well. Obviously I remember all the women in this book very easily. Although it's also because there are way less women, so. Although Mrs. Cadwallader, she's great. I think she's so funny. I did get really frustrated with Rosamond actually in that book. I didn't particularly like her to begin with, but I was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt throughout the whole other like rest of the book. But yeah, this book I really didn't enjoy her behaviour. I'm just really interested in what this book is saying, you know, about everything. And there was, oh yeah, there's this quote that it chooses. Well, there's this quote at the beginning of chapter 61, which is from Rasselas, and it says, "Inconsistencies, answered Imlac, cannot both be right, but imputed to man they may both be true." And I feel like that is really like at the core of this book in so many ways. Yeah, it's just all fascinating me really. It can be pretty ecstatic writing wise. I've also been like paying attention to what language the epigraph has been in and like how many languages we've had, because we've had many. So we've had English, obviously Middle English, we've had French, Spanish, Italian and Latin so far, so that's pretty impressive. I'm sure I might have missed a German one, but I'm sure there will be one, there must be. I mean, they don't always like reference what's actually happening in the chapter as much as some others, if that makes sense. Like some feel much more relevant than others. I might cut this out, but I did get an interview for the, like I got shortlisted for an interview for the PhD application I was writing at the beginning of this vlog. So that's great. So now I need to prepare for it. It's like next week. Either I might read more of this so that I can finish it before the interview, or I might kind of take the pedal off. I don't remember what the phrase is, but you know, take a bit of a break in the run-up just so that I have some time to prepare. I'm not really sure what I will be doing to prepare, because I think I'll just have to be having lots of conversations about why I want to do what I'm doing and like what the, you know, the logic behind my proposal and the research and things like that. So yeah, we'll see. There've been like at least 3 storms whilst I've been here, which I have tried to show some footage of. I don't really know why I wanted to say that now, but I did. My camera just cut me off, so I guess that's like a good time for me to stop talking. So I'm gonna stop talking. Bye! Hello. It is very late, so I'm gonna try and be as quiet as possible, but you know, hopefully you can hear me still. I have finished book 7, and it was all really kicking off then in many different ways. Middlemarch is a place of rumour and murder and sinful behaviour. Now I'm on to book 8, Sunset and Sunrise. Apologies. I am also gonna like leave this update a little brief because it's late, and also I want to finish the book now, you know? What else can I say except for wait to see what happens? The growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who have lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. I finished Middlemarch. I finished it last night, but I thought I would wait until this morning to, well, it's not actually morning anymore, but you know, to talk about it, because then I could properly talk about it, unlike my last update. I'm gonna kind of wrap up the last 2-ish, but mostly the last book. If you have been watching this because there's been like somewhat light spoilers, or like you don't care that much about spoilers, that's just kind of a warning, I guess, because I'm gonna like talk explicitly about like what happens at the end of the novel. I think the 8th book is actually longer than the 7th, but the chapters get shorter and shorter, it feels like, because I just kind of was speeding through. So yes, I'm finished, and you know, I loved it. Something I really enjoyed about the whole experience of this is that occasionally like I would be taught a new word, and I really love reading books where, you know, you're taught new words. I felt like the final book was very atmospheric, especially because there's often like a storm or rain kind of hovering over it. A scene that has stuck with me since I read it in an earlier book, I can't remember which one anymore, but quite a few books ago I think, is when Will Ladislaw and Dorothea are like talking to each other, and it describes them as these like two plants that are like facing each other and kind of moving towards each other, and I just was really struck by that image because I think it's so beautiful. I also just thought it was like a very romantic image really, and just like really creative, and also I guess kind of speaks to the like differences between Dorothea's feelings and response to Cassiubon and her response and feelings for Will, like, you know, seeing the Cassiubon stuff as like this really cerebral, non-physical, non-embodied, but also like obviously a mistake, desire, versus with Will it's like earthy and rooted and like part of her actual self rather than her kind of mentality or like her mind. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah. Something that definitely comes up way more that I don't think I've spoken about at all is the anti-Semitism around Will Ladislaw, because he had like a Jewish grandfather or something like that. For me, I found that quite an unclear sort of information about Bulstrode and what he actually practicably did, and then what Will's grandfather or whoever it was did, and how connected Will was really to that. But yeah, there's, you know, people are really anti-Semitic about it, and that's sort of one of the reasons why Will is seen as like completely unsuitable for Dorothea, aside from like the codicil, which is just hilarious and just deeply tempting fate, like truly. And like after reading those bits about Will, which I wouldn't say there are that many, but there are like a couple, it does make me even more interested to kind of read Daniel Deronda and see what Eliot is doing there, even more so than I already was. Something else that I think comes up in book 8 is that obviously Dorothea and Rosamund should be together. There are bits where it's like Dorothea was always like so like struck by, like thought a lot about Rosamund, or like, and like Rosamund's beauty, and Rosamund is really touched and changed by Dorothea's presence in her life, and I don't know, it's pretty gay, I think. Also, one thing that Lydgate says in this book was truly just like, it's this, which is wild. He once called her his basil plant, and when she asked for an explanation said that basil was a plant which had flourished wonderfully on a murdered man's brains. Wow, what a beautiful representation of marriage. Yeah, no, that's not great. I would say that like Dorothea and Cassiubon and Rosamund times Lydgate kind of, they haunt this novel in a way, kind of mirroring and doubling each other. And like, I suppose like throughout you can see the similarities, but in the final 2 books I would say the similarities between Cassiubon and Lydgate really come to the fore. The suggestion that they are like each other. They made the similar or same mistakes, that they have the same kind of approach to knowledge, or like to wanting to know things, to be an expert on something. And I guess more specifically and more like tragically, they have the same experience of failure, or they both see themselves in a kind of failed way. I mean, Cassiubon's failure I think only comes right near the end of his life, because he has a lot of illusions about himself which make him think that he's way better, way more intelligent and way more on the nose than he is. And then finally when in the Dead Hand, or is it before that book? When it but like, you know, the Dead Hand's grasp, when Dorothea is sort of like, well, please give me time to think whether I'm going to agree to, like, you know, continuing your intellectual legacy, which is totally useless, that is when he suddenly comes to realise his profound failure. And I suppose Lydgate is a little bit the opposite, because he does usefully heal people and help people, and his medical practice does actually work, but it says, you know, that he died at 50 and he thought he was a failure, which like is similar to Cassiubon, I mean. So yeah, interesting there. And also in Lydgate's delight in Dorothea at points, especially thinking that she's like the Virgin Mary and stuff, was also very like Cassiubon esque. Back to this idea of like doubling, which is very persistent throughout the novel in many different ways. It's quite like playful and mischievous, and it does also, I guess, create like a sense of community that they're all kind of like repeating each other in a way. Yeah, to the extent where it kind of almost feels like some of them are like doing little plays of each other. And obviously, like, Lydgate's comment to Rosamund that I read, you know, that does recall us to like his story when he fell in love with the actress who murdered her husband on stage, and you know how she just like was bored and did it. And then he kind of actually did recreate like the situation where he has felt, you know, it's not physically true but it's emotionally true for him. I did still really dislike Rosamund, I will say. I think, you know, she is a little bit redeemed, I guess, but she just really annoyed me so much. I really disliked her approach to life and her like complete lack of care for other people's feelings, because she's just always got what she wanted. And yeah, and not that I particularly like Lydgate, but just I really did not like her. One of the things that I kind of thought as a sort of repeated like motif or scene is that first scene when Will, well, I guess it's not the first scene that they meet, but when Will is really truly struck by Dorothea in Rome, where there's the statue of Venus or Cleopatra, I can never remember, and she's looking at it and she is still too, so she's kind of like recreating marble. So again, we have like this doubling, the like marble statue of womanhood. And there are a couple times later as well where that sort of same dynamic is recreated, and also where the idea that Dorothea is marble, or that when they look at each other they become marble, is repeated, especially near the end, and especially in the final like crux moments of the will they won't they thing that's going on at the end. I really liked kind of looking out for that, and I really enjoyed that repetition. It makes the story both bigger and smaller in a way that is not at all overwhelming and not repetitive really either in like a boring way, but just like in a very humane way, I think. Obviously I have spoken a lot about, or maybe not a lot, but like about the kind of medical engagements this novel is making, the scientific ones, the expansion of medical practice alongside colonization, which is a theme that I would say is like underhandedly explored. It's not right at the focal point. There's just a couple comments that's quite like side, but I think they speak volumes. And there's also some stuff about maps, which I also think could be like drawn into that. And that's also all part of this like scientific method, this desire to get away from illusion into reality, truth and fact, and what the pursuit of knowledge does. I can't remember if I actually have said this, but what I really enjoyed is that this demonstrates that the reason why like Casaubon, for example, failed is because he attempted to take himself out of his intellectual pursuit, and the study of life and of being is made valuable and vital and important through subjectivity, through personhood. But obviously like the fact that it's called a study of provincial life and not just like Middlemarch or whatever also kind of emphasizes the theme of study, the theme of the pursuit of knowledge throughout, but also this idea of making knowledge useful, which I think is really fascinating and also important. But then of course it can also be wielded in like colonial ways, for example, and also in really deeply misogynistic ways. And whilst the novel doesn't take up the way that medicine and medical practice like completely kind of subordinates women's experience of their bodies and health, that is obviously one part of this like scientific advancement that is happening, because there's this reliance on one kind of reality, one kind of truth, one kind of fact, and those are all masculine, white, Western ones, and that just shuts out like a lot of people's bodily and mental experience. I love the narrator throughout the whole book. She's my favourite character. I actually at one point thought that maybe Celia was the narrator. I don't think that that's sort of on purpose, and I think that the narrator is George Eliot, but I just felt like, especially because Celia is not treated particularly well when she becomes a mother, like she does sort of lose her previous clear brilliance. Like they do talk about Dorothea and her being like pretty clever, and whilst Dorothea is more clever, she's still like really clever. Yeah, and when she becomes a mother, like she's just obsessed with baby. But then at one point the narrative takes on calling her child baby too, which made me be like, oh, maybe she's trying to be funny, and kind of that's why Celia loses her character so quickly, because she becomes the narrative force of the novel. I think the book where it gets like the most sort of like, I don't really want to say gothic, but almost kind of like sinister for me was the Dead Hand's Grasp. I was so stressed that Dorothea would say yes to Casaubon, and I I'm so glad she didn't, / I'm so glad that he died just in time for her not to say it. I don't think I've mentioned Caleb Garth at all, but he was very nice, although he does represent this kind of like philanthropic capitalism, which I do feel like Elizabeth Gaskell has a lot in her work, especially in like North and South and Cranford, but also like generally her whole vibe, which is interesting and obviously something I don't agree with, but he was still quite a nice person, it seemed. One of the themes as well is this idea of like feelings as a kind of fact, as a factfulness. Again, it's a bit like the sort of pursuit of knowledge. It can have these like good effects and it can have these bad effects. On a fundamental level, like that's true, right? Like having a feeling is a fact because it's an experience and it's true for a person. Yeah, having a feeling that you think is a fact can lead you to behave in a way that is really bad and cruel at points and just make deeply terrible mistakes, but it can also lead you to act in a way that is compassionate and sympathetic and faithful and kind. And Dorothea obviously like represents people who do that very well, because she's often the sort of like instigator of change, of kind of like a maternal care. Like obviously she only becomes a mother at the very end of the book, but her maternity is almost like throughout, especially with the whole Virgin Mary vibe and her like, yeah, religiosity. I mean, I just love how she's like this really intense freak and Will Ladislaw just cannot get enough of her. I still found it to be like pretty like beautifully written, still often scientific, although that does feel more present at the beginning of the book than I felt it was at the end, although that might just be because I got used to that register of writing. Yeah, oh, I didn't really say, but I finished very early in terms of like, my interview is on Thursday and that's in 2 days, right? Yes, 2 days. And I was supposed to finish the book the day after my interview, and then, you know, it gradually got closer and closer to yesterday. I might kind of come back when I've read the intro and when I finish this to sort of wrap it up a little bit. I wasn't going to film anymore because I actually decided I'm too tired and I don't care to read the introduction, so I'm not going to do that. At least not until I actually feel drawn to do so. But then I read Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney, and Middlemarch is again mentioned in it, a bit like Dead Collections with Isaac Fellman. And I also have kind of always known that Sally Rooney likes George Eliot, because remember ages ago when between two books we're reading Normal People, she recommended Daniel Deronda to read alongside it as like a secondary recommendation because she loved that novel. I've been almost trying to like plot each character onto characters in Middlemarch. You know, for a while I was like, maybe Bobby is supposed to be kind of like Dorothea, or maybe Francis is a bit supposed to be like Dorothea, and I don't know, Melissa and I've forgotten his name, Nick, you know, maybe they represent one of the like ill-fated couples in Middlemarch. I don't know, all interesting, but I don't think I ever quite got to that, and I don't think that's the point or anything. But yeah, interesting that it was present in here, and you know, a nice way to round off this vlog. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. Thank you so much for watching this vlog. I hope it was interesting, and let me know if you've read Middlemarch, or if you would read Middlemarch, or you know, yeah, if you like it, if you've read any more George Eliot. I hope you have a nice day when you're watching this, and I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye!